My name is David Vance. For the last 12 years, I have been the ghost in the machine of Ether Systems. When I met Claire, she was a struggling MBA student with a vision for a cloud-based operating system that could revolutionize global logistics. I was a genius-level coder working out of a basement. We fell in love, or so I thought. We built a life together on a foundation of late-night coding sessions and shared dreams. While Claire was the face of the company, the charismatic CEO who graced the covers of tech magazines, I was the architect. I wrote every line of the core kernel, the proprietary code that made Ether Systems a $10 billion giant. We got married privately 10 years ago, a quiet ceremony that we kept out of the press to protect the brand. Claire always said our marriage was our secret sanctuary, but I realize now it was just a legal loophole she was waiting to close. The betrayal didn't happen in a dark alley. It happened in a glass-walled conference room on the 50th floor of our headquarters in Seattle. I had just finished a grueling 16-month cycle developing Ether 2.0, the update that would secure our dominance for the next decade. I walked into the meeting expecting a celebration. Instead, I found Claire sitting at the head of the table, flanked by a team of high-priced corporate lawyers I had never met. Beside her sat Julian, a sleek, silver-tongued venture capitalist who had been sniffing around Claire for months. Claire didn't even look at me. She pushed a thick folder across the mahogany table. "David, the board has decided that Ether needs a fresh direction. Your technical approach is becoming stagnant. Julian will be stepping in as the new Chief Technology Officer. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for a decade, the woman I had built an empire for. Her face was as cold as a server room. "And as for our personal arrangement," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion, "the divorce papers are in the back of that folder. I've already moved your things out of the penthouse. Don't make this a scene, David. Let's be professional." I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I've spent my life in the world of logic gates and binary code. I know that when a system is compromised, you don't scream at the hardware. You begin the recovery protocol. I picked up the folder and walked out of the building I had spent 12 years of my life building. As the elevator descended, I felt a familiar coldness settling in my chest. Claire thought she was firing an employee. She forgot she was disconnecting the very brain that kept her company alive. I took a cab to a small, nondescript apartment in the suburbs, a place I had kept in my name only a remnant of my life before the billions. I sat on the floor with my laptop, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I checked our joint accounts. Frozen. I checked the trust fund we had established for our future. Drained. She had been planning this for years. She had used the Ether 2.0 development cycle to distract me while she systematically stripped me of every legal and financial tie to the company. She had even used the private nature of our marriage to claim in the divorce filing that we were never truly a domestic partnership, but rather a long-term business arrangement that had reached its conclusion. But Claire made one fatal error. She was a marketing genius, but she never understood the code. She saw the Ether OS as a product, a black box that just worked. She didn't know that the kernel I wrote wasn't just code, it was a living, breathing ecosystem with its own set of rules. When I built the first version of Ether in that basement 12 years ago, my father, a veteran intelligence officer, had given me a piece of advice. "Always keep a backdoor to your own house, son. You never know who might try to change the locks." I didn't install a virus or a kill switch. That would be illegal and easy to trace. Instead, I had built a heartbeat protocol. Every 30 days, the core kernel required a manual cryptographic handshake from my private, offline server. If that handshake wasn't performed, the system wouldn't crash. It would simply begin to degrade. It would start with tiny latencies. A millisecond here, a lost packet there. Within 60 days, the efficiency of the global logistics network would drop by 40%. Within 90 days, the system would become so unstable that the billion-dollar contracts Claire had signed with the world's largest shipping companies would be worth less than the paper they were printed on. I logged into the internal security feed of the penthouse. I watched as Claire and Julian celebrated with a bottle of vintage champagne. Julian was sitting in my favorite chair, his arm around Claire, laughing about how they had finally trimmed the dead weight. He was showing her a plan to sell the company to a Chinese conglomerate for a massive payout, a move that would destroy the jobs of 5,000 employees I had worked alongside for a decade. Dead weight, I whispered to the empty room. A small, grim smile touched my lips. I opened my terminal and typed in a single command. It was the command to stop the heartbeat protocol. The clock was now ticking. Claire had 30 days to realize that she hadn't just fired her husband. She had fired the only person who could stop her world from collapsing. I wasn't just a coder anymore. I was a ghost in her machine, and I was going to watch her empire burn from the inside out. I spent the next 48 hours setting up my new digital perimeter. I moved my remaining untraceable assets into encrypted crypto wallets. I contacted an old friend, a fixer named Silas, who lived in the dark corners of the web. Silas, I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. The ether has gone dark. I need a shadow identity and a secure line. I'm going into deep cover. Silas didn't ask questions. He knew the world of high-stakes tech. You got it, Ghost. But David, once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. You're going up against a $10 billion war chest. I'm not going up against it, I replied, looking at the live feed of Claire laughing on her balcony. I'm going to let it destroy itself. I just need to be the one who sweeps up the ashes. As the sun rose over the Seattle skyline, I closed my laptop. The first millisecond of latency had already hit the Ether servers. The countdown to her destruction had officially begun. The first 10 days were masterclass in silent warfare. I lived in that cramped apartment, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of 3 overclocked servers, while Claire and Julian were busy doing a victory lap in the press, giving interviews about the new era of Ether. I was watching the microscopic cracks begin to spread through the foundation of their digital palace. The heartbeat protocol had ceased, and, as I predicted, the system was starting to suffocate. It started in the Singapore hub. A minor lag in the automated sorting drones meant that a shipment of medical supplies was delayed by 6 hours. To the outside world, it was a glitch. To me, it was the first sign of the systemic rot I had initiated. I monitored their internal communications with the surgical precision of a voyeur. Claire was starting to get nervous. I watched through the office's hidden diagnostic camera as she paced the floor of her boardroom, her high heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. Julian, the partners in Europe are complaining about ghost packets in the stream, she snapped, her voice losing that rehearsio calm. Julian, ever the arrogant peacock, just waved his hand dismissively. It's just integration friction, Claire. The system is adjusting to the new management protocols. Give the developers a week to iron it out. He didn't understand. He thought he was managing a machine. He didn't realize he was trying to tame a hurricane. But I wasn't just waiting for the crash. I was building a cage for them. I spent my nights digging through the encrypted subfolders of the company's legal department, files that Claire thought were protected by the very OS I had designed. I found exactly what I was looking for, the Project Phoenix files. It was a secret contingency plan Julian had drafted months before I was fired. The plan wasn't just to sell the company. It was to asset strip it. They were planning to sell the core encryption algorithms, the ones I had promised the government would remain secure, to a private military contractor with ties to several sanctioned regimes. This wasn't just corporate greed anymore. This was high-level treason. The realization hit me harder than the divorce papers. Claire wasn't just a gold digger. She was a traitor to the very principles we had founded the company on. My rage, which had been a cold, steady hum, suddenly flared into a scorching heat. I realized then that I couldn't just let the system degrade. I had to ensure that when it fell, it landed directly on top of them. I reached out to Silas again. I need a meeting with the SEC's cybercrime division. I told him, my fingers flying across the keys. But not yet. I need more. I need the audio of them discussing the Phoenix sale. Using the smart home access I still maintained through a hidden administrative override, I waited for them to return to the penthouse. That night, the air was heavy with an approaching storm. I watched as Julian and Claire sat on the terrace, overlooking the city they thought they owned. Julian was leaning in, his voice a low, greasy murmur. The buyers in Macau are ready, Claire. 50 million in crypto as a down payment once we accidentally leak the Colonel's backdoors. We'll be in the Mediterranean before the feds even realize the encryption is compromised. Claire hesitated for a split second, a flicker of the woman I used to know, but then she took a sip of her wine and nodded. David was always too sentimental about national security. This is business. I recorded every word. I captured the digital signatures of the Macau transfer. I had them, but I wasn't ready to pull the trigger. I wanted them to feel the desperation first. I wanted them to see their billion-dollar valuation turn into a liability. By day 20, the glitches had become a full-blown contagion. Ether Systems' stock price began to wobble as reports of unexplained technical instability hit the Wall Street Journal. The major shipping conglomerates were issuing yellow alerts. Claire's phone was ringing off the hook. I watched her through the camera in her car. She looked haggard, her makeup failing to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She called Julian, her voice echoing with a frantic edge. "The system is failing, Julian. The engineers say they can't find the source of the latency. It's like the code is dying." Julian was no longer smiling. "We need David," he whispered. "He's the only one who knows the Colonel's architecture." Claire let out a bitter, jagged laugh. "I've tried calling him. His phone is disconnected. His accounts are gone. He's disappeared." She didn't know I was only 3 miles away, watching her world burn in high definition. She tried to hire a team of elite hackers, mercenaries of the digital world, to break into my core architecture and force a restart. I watched them try. It was like watching children try to pick a lock made of liquid shadow. Every time they bypassed one layer, I would remotely shift the encryption keys, leading them into honeypots, trap servers that logged their IP addresses and reported them directly to the FBI's cyber division. On day 25, the Ether stock dropped 15% in a single morning. The board of directors was in a panic. Julian was starting to pack his bags, sensing the ship was sinking. But he couldn't leave yet. He needed the final Phoenix codes to get his payout. He didn't realize those codes were buried in a sector of the server that was already being deleted by my heartbeat protocol. They were trapped in a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. I sat in my dark room, the only light coming from the 3 monitors that displayed my vengeance. I felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had shared every secret with. And yet, seeing her unravel brought me no pain, only a clinical satisfaction. She had tried to erase me, to turn me into a non-entity so she could play at being a queen. She had forgotten that in the world of the 21st century, the person who controls the information is the only one who truly wears the crown. I prepared the final payload. It wasn't a message of hate. It was a simple, automated email scheduled to be sent to every major news outlet and the Department of Justice on day 30. It contained the audio of the terrorist conversation, the Project Phoenix documents, and the proof of the Macau wire transfers. But before that, I had one final task. I wanted to see her face when she realized that the dead weight was actually the only thing that had been keeping her afloat. I began to write a single line of code that would be displayed on every screen in the Ether headquarters at exactly 9 a.m. on the final day. A simple, 3-word message that would signal the end of her reign and the beginning of my true life. The storm finally broke over Seattle, lightning illuminating my apartment in sudden, violent flashes. I looked at the countdown on my screen, 120 hours remaining. 120 hours until Ether Systems ceased to exist. 120 hours until Claire and Julian faced the cold reality of a federal prison cell. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the room finally feeling peaceful. The ghost was ready to become a man again. The final countdown hit 0 at exactly 9 a.m. on a Monday. The Ether Systems headquarters was a hive of controlled chaos. The board of directors had called an emergency session to oust Claire, and the lobby was swarming with reporters sensing the blood in the water. I sat in a parked car across the street, my laptop open on my knees, watching the internal feeds one last time. Claire was in her office, her face a mask of desperation as she screamed into her phone at Julian, who had stopped answering her calls hours ago. She was alone. The woman who had sacrificed everything for a $10 billion throne was finally discovering that a throne is just a chair when the walls are falling down. I executed the final command. Simultaneously, every screen in the building, from the massive monitors in the lobby to the tablets in the elevators, flickered and went black. Then, a single line of text appeared in glowing white letters against the darkness. Heartbeat terminated. Goodbye, Claire. I watched through the desk camera as she slumped in her chair, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She knew then. She knew that I hadn't been hiding. I had been presiding over her funeral. 5 minutes later, the Department of Justice and the FBI moved in. Because of the evidence I had forwarded, they didn't just come for questioning. They came with arrest warrants for corporate espionage, treason, and securities fraud. I watched as Claire was led out of her glass office in handcuffs, her head bowed, her designer suit wrinkled and stained with the sweat of her panic. Julian was apprehended at the airport, trying to board a private jet to Macau with a suitcase full of encrypted drives that were now nothing more than expensive paperweights. I had remotely wiped them the moment he passed through security. The fallout was absolute. Ether Systems went into federal receivership, its stock price plummeting to pennies. But I wasn't finished. I stepped forward as the whistleblower. Because I had provided the evidence that stopped a major national security breach, the government granted me full immunity and, more importantly, recognized my original intellectual property rights. The Phoenix sale was blocked, and the core kernel of Ether was returned to my sole ownership. I didn't restart the old company. I didn't want the name or the baggage. I dissolved the corporation, ensured that every mid-level employee received a generous severance package from the remaining liquidated assets, and made the core OS open source for public infrastructure. In the divorce court, the judge took one look at the evidence of Claire's fraud and the Project Phoenix treason. The private marriage she had tried to erase was validated, and she was ordered to pay back every cent she had drained from our joint accounts. Of course, she had no money left. The government had seized her personal assets as part of the criminal proceedings. She was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Julian received 20. I left Seattle that week. I didn't take a limo or a private jet. I took a bus. I moved to a quiet town in the mountains of Colorado, far away from the glowing screens and the frantic pace of the tech world. I bought a small house with a porch that overlooked a valley of pine trees. I spend my days hiking and my nights reading books that aren't written in C++ or Python. Occasionally, I still sit at my laptop, but only to write code for a nonprofit that helps rural hospitals secure their patient data. People sometimes ask me if I regret destroying a $10 billion empire. I just look at the mountains and smile. You see, Claire thought the value was in the company, in the brand, and in the zeros in the bank account. She never understood that the real power was in the creator, not the creation. I didn't lose $10 billion. I gained my soul back. And as I watch the sunset over the Rockies, I know that for the first time in 12 years, my own heartbeat is the only protocol I need to follow. The machine is gone, and the man is finally free.